So here we have, this is a video from DW News, which is a German public broadcaster. And they're going to give us a little bit of the background to the assassination of Shinzo Abe, the former Japanese leader. So let's go ahead and listen to some of that, and then I'll give you more information on it.
Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has died after being shot at a campaign event. Police say a 41-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the shooting. Abe was the country's longest-serving premier and was well known for his strong economic and defense policies. His killing has shocked Japan, the nation where firearms are strictly regulated and political violence. So
let me just comment on that real quick. There were a bunch of people who lean right and who are very pro-gun rights who used the killing of Shinzo Abe to say, look at that, bro. Obviously, gun control laws don't work. That is such a flippant and glib and stupid response because there's only 9 gun deaths per year in Japan. 9. We have 39,000 in the U.S. So you got to look at the macro statistics, and the macro statistics paint a very, very clear picture, but they think because one person was killed with a gun, they're like, oh, well, obviously, gun control laws don't work. Well, I'll ask those people, would you rather have 9 gun deaths a year or 39,000 gun deaths a year? Now, by the way, their laws are super strict, like way more strict than what my preferences are. But you have to call a spade and say, in terms of reducing gun violence, oh, it absolutely works. I mean, there's a trade-off and you have no right at all to a firearm there, but it works in terms of, from a public safety perspective. Anyway, I digress.
This is extremely rare.
The moment Shinzo Abe was shot twice, a suspect manhandled to the ground. What appears to be a weapon lying on the road nearby.
Clearly a makeshift weapon. I mean, held together, I think, with literal duct tape.
People ran to the aid of Japan's former prime minister as he lay seriously wounded. He was quickly transferred to helicopter and flown to hospital. At this point, his condition was described as critical, but doctors were unable to save him. Confirming his death, the hospital said the 67-year-old had suffered 2 deep wounds, including to his heart. The area in the city of Nara, where this veteran politician had been giving an election campaign speech, is now a crime scene. The assassination has shocked Japan, a country where gun violence is rare.
This is a dastardly and barbaric act that took place in the midst of an election. This is the basis of a democracy and is absolutely unforgivable. I would like to use the harshest words to condemn this act.
Shinzo Abe was first elected Prime Minister of Japan in 2006, making him, at 52, the country's youngest ever premier. It proved short-lived. A year later, he quit, following a string of party scandals. He was also suffering from health problems. But he wasn't gone for long. In 2012, he was back, promising to revive Japan's flagging economy following years of deflation. He even put his own name on the plan, Abenomics.
Now, by the way, he was part of what's called the Liberal Democratic Party in Japan, but understand that the Liberal Democratic Party is actually the conservative party in Japan. So I know it's so weird. All these different countries have these names for their political parties, and it will be like contradictory to the actual ideology that they have, and that gets frustrating and annoying, but I just want everybody to understand that he was a conservative.
Abe was also hawkish on defense, expanding Japan's military role after years of pacifism.
Yeah, so let me explain that a little bit. There's pacifism in the Japanese Constitution, which was the United States either helped write it or did write it after World War II. They made Japan a pacifist nation for obvious reasons. I mean, Japan had allied with Nazi Germany. They were an empire. They had a viciously barbaric empire. They, massacred Koreans. They massacred Chinese when they were an empire. And so they made pacifism in the Constitution, and Shinzo Abe wanted to roll back the pacifism that was in there and, build up the Japanese military.
Proved a controversial policy, and he failed to formally rewrite the country's pacifist constitution. He did, though, bolster Japan's security alliance with the United States. Abe was considered a strong leader on the world stage. But in 2020, he again resigned, citing poor health.
It's more, just so everybody understands, it's more corruption than, I have health problems. There were political scandals, and he uses the health thing as an excuse.
Politics, though, was always in his blood, right up until the end.
For more, we can now bring in...
So that's enough of that. Now let me give you some more information on him. So this is on the guy who killed him. The man accused of assassinating former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had reportedly told investigators he targeted Abe because he suspected he had ties to a religious group that took a huge donation from his mother. Law enforcement sources cited by Kyodo News said the suspect, identified as 41-year-old Tetsuya Yamagami, had first planned to attack a leader of the unnamed religious group before settling on Abe instead. Yamagami is said to have told police the killing had nothing to do with politics. Homemade guns and items thought to be explosives were found during a search of Yamagami's home on Friday, just hours after he allegedly used a homemade firearm to gun Abe down in front of a crowd watching him deliver a campaign speech in the city of Nara. Sources cited by Kyodo News said Yamagami admitted to traveling to another city a day earlier where Abe had also given a campaign speech. The police chief of the prefecture, which is Japanese, it's a state basically, where the shocking killing took place, admitted on Saturday that there were problems with the safety measures taken and took full responsibility for the lapses that led to Abe's death. So look, I haven't seen anything particularly convincing on the motives of the guy who did this assassination. This is the line that I've heard. Seems kind of weak, if you ask me. I saw some speculation that effectively the guy who did the killing was like part of Japan's version of QAnon, if you will. I don't know. None of this stuff seems particularly convincing or solid to me in terms of developing a motive. More on Shinzo Abe here. This is in the Daily Beast. Shinzo Abe was Trump before Trump, except he pulled it off. Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe died on Thursday in a scene reminiscent of the Yakuza films he loved so much. That's, of course, the Japanese mafia. Gunned down in a crowd by a lone shooter who didn't even try to escape. The nation was shocked to learn that he had passed away when it was reported by state broadcaster NHK. There were many hoping that he might still pull through. In Nara, passerbys began to place flowers on the site where he was shot, some praying for his safe journey through the spirit world to his next incarnation. 15 years before the bloody incident, Shinzo Abe was considered politically finished when he resigned from office during his first stint as prime minister. He was exhausted, disliked, and unable to weather the tsunami of scandals that surrounded his cabinet. But in 2012, he came back from the graveyard of failed prime ministers to rule for almost 8 years. When news spread that he had been shot twice and was in critical condition, his supporters hoped that he might be able to pull off another miracle, a physical resurrection. That didn't happen. But the man who Donald Trump advisor Stephen Bannon famously praised as Trump before Trump leaves behind a legacy that may have forever changed Japan. He reduced it to a perpetual one-party democracy that seems unlikely to change. Abe certainly seems to have had a playbook that was similar to Donald Trump's. He was a populist who tapped into racism and fears of change to stoke his base and consolidate power. During his exile from power, Abe and his cabinet members allied with anti-Korean and other xenophobic groups. Abe drummed up anti-Korean sentiment to bolster his support and made sure his allies did the dog whistles while he kept his hands clean. While Trump portrayed immigrants as the boogeyman threatening Japan, I think that was supposed to say threatening America, Abe latched on to deep-rooted anti-Korean sentiment towards both the Korean residents of Japan who stayed after the war and citizens of South and North Korea, former colonies of Japan. He appointed Ariko Yamatani, a woman closely associated with the flamingly anti-Korean group Zaitoku Kai, to be the head of the National Public Safety Commission that oversees the National Police Agency. He also embraced Nippon Kaiji, a conservative Shinto cult and political lobby. You could aptly compare his alliance with them to Trump's absorption of the Tea Party and other far-right elements of the Republican Party. Even while out of power, the Liberal Democratic Party, with Abe exerting influence, developed plans for a new imperial constitution for Japan. The removal of the post-war constitution, which was written with the help of the American occupation, not by them as some claim now. During his political exile, Abe even briefly became head of an extremist think tank, Nihon Sosei, which is Create Japan, made up of LDP, Liberal Democratic Party lawmakers, and other conservative superstars. In May 2012, the organization released a clip of him gathering titled The Swearing In of the Revised Constitution for Japan, in which he and his cronies discussed the LDP's substitute constitution. There were some astonishing moments. A former Minister of Justice, Nagase Jinen, appointed during Abe's first term in office, told the crowd, "The people's sovereignty, basic human rights, and pacifism, these three things date to the post-war regime imposed by General MacArthur on Japan. Therefore, we have to get rid of them by making the constitution our own." Abe loudly applauded this. Get rid of basic human rights, democracy, and wage warfare. Also restore the emperor to power. In other words, make Japan great again. It's no wonder that years later, Steve Bannon would say that Abe was Trump before Trump. Abe for many years, the most powerful man in Japan's ruling political party, the Liberal Democratic Party. In fact, he was campaigning for their candidates in the coming upper house elections when he was shot on Thursday. The LDP was founded in 1955 by Abe's grandfather, a former war criminal who also served as prime minister. They were funded with money from Yakuza associate and CIA operative Yoshio Kodama. But starting with his fall from grace, the LDP's popularity sank. In 2009, it seemed like Japan might really change, and for the better. For only the second time since 1955, the perpetually corrupt and archly conservative Liberal Democratic Party was kicked out of power, and the liberal, egalitarian, feminist-leaning Democratic Party of Japan took hold of the reins of power. It was a revolution, but it didn't last long. The DPJ had risen to power partly with expectations that they would be cleaner and less criminal than the LDP, but then one scandal after another implicating the party's top management in unsavory ties with the Yakuza threw dirt on their squeaky clean image. The lower house elections of 2012 were a political meltdown. Almost all the opposition parties, including the DPJ, were decimated, and we know who returned from the political graveyard, ready to rule Japan with a rusty iron fist. Shinzo Abe was quick to take revenge upon his critics once back in power, labeling the liberal newspaper Asahi Shimbun an enemy of the people. Later, he would tell Donald Trump, "You should handle the New York Times the way I handled Asahi." Wow. He bullied the left-wing media and wined and dined the right-wing media, dragging Japan's press freedom from 11th in the world to as low as 72nd place in world rankings. In 2014, he created a cabinet personnel bureau, which exercised ruthless control of bureaucratic appointments, assuring that any government worker who didn't toe the line or released information contradicting the government was either shunned, fired, or sidelined. So very authoritarian on press freedoms is what you're learning here. It worked very effectively, and some high-ranking officials even took it upon themselves to cover up Abe-related scandals without direct orders to do so. Television anchors and pundits that were too critical of Abe vanished from the airwaves. The world's largest newspaper, the Yomiuri Shimbun, smeared the biggest critic in the education ministry for frequenting sexy bars in Kabukicho. So smearing his political opponents. He had no qualms about using the media for defamation campaigns, and the media, and eager for spoon-fed scoops, was happy to comply. Eventually in 2020, the weight of political scandals and an investigation into election law violations by Abe forced him to resign under the guise of medical issues. A few months later, he threw his political secretary under the bus and was more or less exonerated. He kept a low profile for months but couldn't resist the limelight. Shinzo Abe failed to change even one word of Japan's constitution in the end, but did pass several laws that are still eating away at it, including Article 9, Japan's Declaration of Pacifism. His greatest achievement, having so thoroughly discredited opposition parties and critical media that Japan isn't even reminiscent of a two-party democracy. It's a one-party democracy, where the media has its tails between its legs and is likely to stay that way for decades. So, that gives you a look into who Shinzo Abe is, what his ideology is, and the background around that. And then also, look, super conservative guy, wanted to be more militaristic, make Japan less pacifist, hardliner on immigration, anti-Korean, anti-Chinese, authoritarian when it comes to the press. Now, none of this is to say that Homeboy should have been assassinated. Of course not. But you should understand the background and who Abe is. And again, as far as the motive of the guy who did the killing, I still don't have any answer that I find convincing. I told you what's been reported, but, I have a feeling that maybe over time we'll learn more, or maybe we'll never learn more, but I don't think that's the full reasoning. So, by the way, we'll end on this note. As a result of the assassination, now Shinzo Abe's right-wing party, the Liberal Democratic Party, as it's called, is even more popular. They surged in the polls after the assassination. So there you have it. Giant political event. And, of course, other world leaders have come out and offered condolences. And Trump said something about Abe being assassinated. Trump had played golf with him a number of times. Random side point. But anyway, there you have it. Momentous event of a former Japanese leader being assassinated. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.